The coffee pot slipped from her trembling fingers, dark liquid splashing across the counter as three men in leather jackets pressed closer. Her voice cracked when she asked them to step back, barely a whisper against their laughter. Near the window booth, a man with calloused hands set down his cup, his eyes locking onto the scene with the stillness of someone who had seen worse. His 7-year-old daughter noticed the shift in her father's posture, the way his jaw tightened, and she stopped coloring mid-stroke. The diner had the kind of worn charm that came from decades of serving truckers and travelers along the interstate. Faded photographs of local high school football teams lined the walls, their players frozen in moments of glory from years past. The vinyl booths showed their age in cracked seams patched with electrical tape, and the linoleum floor bore the scuff marks of countless shoes that had passed through on journeys to somewhere else. It was nearly 9 in the evening, late enough that the dinner rush had thinned to a handful of customers scattered across the room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a flat, unforgiving glow that made the coffee look darker and the faces look tired. Clare Donovan had worked at Rosie's Diner for 3 years, long enough to know every regular by name and every pothole in the parking lot. She was 26, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of tired eyes that came from working double shifts to cover rent. Her uniform was crisp despite the long hours, the name tag pinned slightly crooked over her heart, and she moved between tables with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. Tonight was supposed to be easy, a slow Thursday. Nothing remarkable, but the 3 men who walked in around 8:30 changed that within minutes. They sat at the counter instead of a booth, which should have been the first warning. Locals knew the counter was for quick coffee and pie, not for lingering. These men lingered. They ordered beers, which the diner did not serve, and when Claire explained this with an apologetic smile, they laughed like she had told a joke. The one in the middle, a thick-necked man with a shaved head and a snake tattoo curling up his forearm, leaned across the counter and told her she could make an exception for them. His breath smelled like whiskey and something sour underneath. His eyes traveled down her body in a way that made her skin crawl, lingering in places that made her want to cross her arms over her chest. Claire kept her voice steady and offered them coffee instead, the way she had been trained to diffuse difficult customers. The man on the left, younger and leaner with a nervous energy that made his leg bounce constantly against the stool, accepted with a shrug. He had the look of someone who followed orders rather than gave them, his eyes darting between his companions, as if seeking approval for every small decision. The one on the right said nothing, just stared at her with flat eyes that never seemed to blink. There was something dead in that gaze, something hollow that suggested he had crossed lines most people only imagined. She poured their coffee with hands that wanted to shake and tried to move to the other end of the counter, but the one in the middle reached out and caught her wrist. His grip was not hard enough to bruise, not yet, but it was firm enough to stop her in place. He asked her name, and when she told him, he repeated it slowly, like he was tasting each syllable on his tongue. He said Claire was a pretty name for a pretty girl working in a dump like this. She thanked him automatically and tried to pull away, but he held on, asking if she had a boyfriend, if she got off soon, if she wanted to have some fun after her shift. His thumb rubbed circles on the inside of her wrist, an intimate gesture that felt like a violation. The other customers in the diner developed a sudden fascination with their meals. An elderly couple in the corner booth studied their meatloaf with intense concentration, forks moving mechanically as they refused to look up from their plates. They had been married for 47 years and had learned long ago when to mind their own business. The wife reached under the table and squeezed her husband's hand, a silent communication that said they should finish quickly and leave. A truck driver at the far end of the counter hunched over his soup, spoon frozen halfway to his mouth, his reflection in the napkin dispenser carefully avoiding the scene playing out behind him. He was a big man, easily 250 pounds, but he had a family waiting for him in Ohio, and he was not about to risk never seeing them again over a stranger's troubles. Even Dale Hutchins, the night manager, found something urgent to attend to in the back office, his shadow visible through the small window in the kitchen door as he deliberately avoided looking at the counter. He had been managing this diner for 8 years, and he had learned that getting involved in customer disputes only led to complaints and paperwork and sometimes broken furniture that came out of his paycheck. The silence of complicity filled the room like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Claire felt the familiar heat of humiliation creeping up her neck. She knew this dance. She had performed it before, with other men in other diners, learning early that the customer was always right, even when he was wrong. She smiled the smile she had perfected over years of service work, the one that reached her mouth but never quite made it to her eyes. She said she was flattered, but she had tables to check on. The man with the snake tattoo finally released her wrist, but his hand brushed against her hip as she stepped back, a touch that was just ambiguous enough to deny if confronted. His companions chuckled, sharing a look that suggested this was a game they had played many times before. In the booth by the window, Marcus Cole watched this unfold with the practiced stillness of a man who had spent years learning to observe before acting. He was 34, with the kind of weathered features that came from too much sun and not enough sleep. His brown hair was cut short, almost military length, and his hands bore the small scars of someone who worked with them for a living. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance, nothing that would mark him as dangerous to a casual observer. That anonymity was intentional. Beside him, his daughter Emma pushed her crayons around the placemat, but her attention kept drifting to the counter and the loud men who made the waitress look scared. Marcus had brought Emma here for their Thursday night tradition, a ritual they had maintained since her mother passed away 2 years ago. Every Thursday, without fail, they drove the 20 minutes from their small house outside of town to Rosie's Diner, where Emma always ordered the same thing: chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream. It was their time together, protected and predictable, a small island of normalcy in the complicated waters of single parenthood. The routine had become sacred in the way that routines do for those who have lost too much. Under the table, a German shepherd named Titan lay with his head on his paws, seemingly asleep. But his ears rotated like satellite dishes, tracking every sound in the room with precision. When the young man at the counter laughed too loud, Titan's eyes opened briefly, assessed the situation, and closed again. He was 8 years old, a former military working dog with more deployments than some soldiers, and his calm was the calm of experience rather than ignorance. He had seen violence in its most concentrated forms and had learned to distinguish between posturing and genuine threat. Emma tugged at her father's sleeve and whispered that the lady looked scared. Marcus nodded, acknowledging her observation, without taking his eyes off the counter. He told her that some people were not very nice, and sometimes other people had to decide what to do about that. Emma asked if he was going to do something. Marcus said he was thinking about it. His voice was measured, revealing nothing of the calculations already running through his mind. The young man with the bouncing leg stood up and moved toward the restroom, but his path took him deliberately close to Clare, who was refilling sugar dispensers at a side station. He brushed against her back as he passed, pressing close enough that she could feel his body heat through her uniform. She flinched hard enough to spill sugar across the counter. He apologized with a smirk that made it clear the contact was intentional. Claire said nothing, just swept the sugar into her palm with quick, practiced movements, her cheeks burning with shame. When the young man returned from the restroom, he rejoined his companions at the counter, and their conversation dropped to a murmur that was somehow more threatening than their earlier loud talk. They were planning something. Claire could feel it in the way they kept glancing at her, in the way their laughter had turned dark. She moved through her closing duties with mechanical precision, checking her watch every few minutes, counting down the hour until her shift ended. But the diner would not close until 11, and these men showed no signs of leaving. The one with the flat eyes finally spoke, and his voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. He asked Claire when she got off work. She said 11. He nodded slowly and said they might wait around, keep her company while she closed up, make sure she got to her car safely. His tone suggested this was not a request. The implication hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Marcus finished his coffee and signaled for a refill. When Claire approached his table, pot in hand, he saw the fine tremor in her fingers and the way she kept glancing toward the door. He thanked her for the refill and asked, quietly enough that only she could hear, if she was all right. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, a desperate hope that someone had noticed. But then the professional mask slammed back into place, and she assured him everything was fine. She moved away before he could say anything else, and Marcus understood. She was afraid that drawing more attention would make it worse. Emma asked her father why the lady did not just tell the mean men to go away. Marcus explained that sometimes things were more complicated than that. Sometimes people felt trapped by circumstances, by fear. Emma considered this with the serious expression she had inherited from her mother, then asked if Titan could make them go away. Marcus allowed himself a small smile and said Titan was very good at making people go away, but they had to be sure it was the right time first. The snake tattoo man stood abruptly, and his stool scraped against the linoleum with a sound that made everyone freeze. He walked toward Clare, who was wiping down a booth near the kitchen, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences. He said something Marcus could not hear, but the effect on Clare was immediate. She backed against the booth, her cleaning rag clutched to her chest like a shield. The man reached out and touched her hair, twisting a strand around his finger. Claire's mouth moved, probably asking him to stop, but he only smiled and leaned closer. His companions watched from the counter, the young one grinning while the quiet one maintained his unsettling stare. The kitchen door remained closed. Dale was not coming. Nobody was coming. Marcus felt Emma's hand tighten on his arm. He looked down at his daughter, saw the fear on her face, and made his decision. He told Emma to stay in the booth and not move, no matter what happened. His voice was calm and clear, the voice he had used when giving orders in situations far more dangerous than this. Emma nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. Under the table, Titan responded to a subtle shift in Marcus's posture, rising from his resting position to a ready crouch. His muscles tensed beneath his black and tan coat, and his eyes fixed on the three men with predatory focus. He made no sound. He did not need to. Marcus stood slowly, every movement deliberate and controlled. He was not a large man, perhaps 5'10" and lean, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made him seem bigger. He walked toward the counter with an unhurried pace that drew the attention of the young man first, then the quiet one. The snake tattoo man was still focused on Clare, still playing with her hair. Marcus stopped about 6 feet away and spoke in a voice that carried without shouting. He suggested the gentleman should step back from the lady. The word gentleman came out flat, stripped of any respect. The snake tattoo man turned, his hand dropping from Claire's hair, and for the first time he really looked at Marcus. What he saw was a guy in a flannel shirt and work boots, a guy with a kid and a dog, a guy who had no business getting involved. He laughed and asked Marcus if he had a problem. Marcus said he did not have a problem yet, but he was working on acquiring one. The snake tattoo man took a step toward him, puffing his chest out. Clare used the distraction to slip away from the booth, moving quickly toward the kitchen door. The snake tattoo man noticed and started to reach for her, but Marcus shifted his position, placing himself directly in the path. He asked again, politely, for the men to leave the waitress alone and enjoy their coffee in peace. The young one slid off his stool and flanked to Marcus's left. The quiet one remained seated but turned to face the confrontation, his flat eyes showing the first spark of interest. Emma watched from the window booth, one hand resting on Titan's collar. The old German shepherd remained in position, awaiting a command that had not yet been given. The snake tattoo man smiled, showing teeth that were slightly too white, and asked Marcus what he planned to do about it. Just him against the three of them. Did he think he was some kind of hero? Marcus said he was not a hero. He was just a guy trying to have dinner with his daughter. But if they wanted to continue harassing the staff, they would have to go through him first. His voice never rose, never sharpened, just maintained that same steady cadence that was somehow more unsettling than any threat. The quiet one finally spoke again, his soft voice carrying across the silence. He said maybe they should teach the concerned citizen a lesson about minding his own business. Claire had made it to the kitchen door, and through the small window, Marcus could see Dale, the manager, finally emerging from his hiding spot, phone in hand. It did not matter. Whatever was going to happen would happen before any backup arrived. The snake tattoo man took another step closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the dilated pupils that suggested something stronger in his system. The man asked one more time if Marcus was sure he wanted to do this. 3 against 1 were not great odds. Marcus thought about Emma sitting in that booth. He thought about Claire, who probably had a family of her own. He thought about all the times he had watched evil go unchallenged because good people did nothing, and he made his peace with what came next. He told the man that he had asked nicely. That was more than most people got. The young one moved first, which was a mistake. He telegraphed his punch from a mile away, drawing back his fist with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Marcus sidestepped the blow, caught the arm at the wrist and elbow, and used the man's momentum to spin him face first into the counter. The impact was loud, and the young man slumped to the floor with a groan, blood streaming from his nose. The quiet one came next, pulling something from his jacket. The glint of metal registered in Marcus's peripheral vision, and everything slowed down the way it always did in moments like this. Training kicked in like muscle memory, years of drills and deployments collapsing into a single fluid response. Marcus closed the distance before the knife could come up, trapping the arm against his body and driving his palm into the man's solar plexus. The knife clattered to the floor as the quiet one folded, gasping for air that would not come. Marcus kicked the weapon under the counter and turned to face the snake tattoo man, who had finally grasped that this was not going the way he had planned. Titan was there. Not because Marcus had called him, but because the dog had read the situation and made his own tactical decision. He positioned himself between the fallen men and Emma's booth, a living barrier of muscle and teeth. His hackles were raised, but he still had not made a sound. His presence alone was a statement. The snake tattoo man reached toward his waistband, and that was the moment everything crystallized. Marcus saw the bulge under the man's jacket, the telltale outline of a firearm, and he moved with the explosive speed that had kept him alive through 6 deployments. He hit the man's arm just as the gun cleared the waistband, redirecting the weapon away from any viable target. His other hand struck the man's throat, not hard enough to crush the windpipe, but hard enough to short-circuit his motor functions. The gun discharged into the floor, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, and then Marcus had the weapon, and the man had nothing but his own weight dragging him to the ground. The whole exchange had taken less than 15 seconds. Emma had covered her ears at the gunshot, but she had not run, had not screamed. She had lived with Marcus Cole long enough to understand that sometimes her father did things that other fathers did not do, and she had learned to trust that he always came back to her. Titan remained at his post, now actively growling at the 2 men on the ground who were starting to recover. The young one had pushed himself to his knees, blood still dripping from his broken nose. The quiet one was curled in a fetal position, making small sounds of distress. Marcus stood over the snake tattoo man, the confiscated pistol held in a grip that suggested intimate familiarity. He informed the man that he was going to lie very still until the police arrived. The man stared up at him with a mixture of shock and fury. The diner had erupted into chaos around them. The elderly couple had fled out the back door. The truck driver was on his phone, voice high and frantic. Dale, the manager, had finally emerged from the kitchen, pale and shaking, asking what in God's name had just happened. Claire stood frozen by the coffee station, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was staring at Marcus like he was something from another world, something that had materialized specifically to answer a prayer she had been too afraid to speak. Marcus secured the pistol, ejecting the magazine and clearing the chamber with automatic movements. He set the weapon on the counter, far from any of the fallen men, and then he walked to Emma's booth. He knelt in front of his daughter and asked if she was okay. Emma nodded, her small face pale but composed. She asked if the bad men were going to jail. Marcus said yes, they were going to jail. She asked if he had hurt them very badly. He said only as much as he had to. Titan finally relaxed, his growl subsiding to a low rumble as he positioned himself beside Emma. The old dog licked her hand once, a gesture of comfort, before resuming his watchful stance. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The snake tattoo man tried to rise, but Marcus told him to stay down, and something in that voice made the man comply instantly. 2 officers came through the door, weapons drawn. Marcus identified himself calmly, explaining that the 3 men on the floor had been harassing the waitress, that one of them had drawn a weapon, and that he had intervened. The pistol was on the counter. He had no other weapons on his person. The older officer, a sergeant with gray at his temples, approached Marcus while his partner covered the fallen men. The sergeant asked for identification, and Marcus reached slowly into his back pocket for his wallet. He handed over his driver's license and one other card. The sergeant studied the second card for a long moment. His eyebrows rose. He looked at Marcus with new understanding and asked if the Navy knew he was moonlighting as a small-town vigilante. Marcus said he was retired. The sergeant said he could tell. The next hour passed in a blur of statements and procedures. Paramedics arrived to treat the 3 men, who were subsequently arrested on charges that included assault, unlawful possession of a firearm, and felony menacing. The young one's nose was broken in 2 places. The quiet one had 3 cracked ribs. The snake tattoo man would spend the next month unable to speak above a whisper. Clare sat with Emma while Marcus gave his official statement, the 2 of them sharing hot chocolate that Dale had nervously prepared. Clare asked Emma about her dog, and Emma explained that Titan was a very special dog who used to work with soldiers. Clare said she could tell. Titan was lying at their feet, finally relaxed, accepting the small pieces of bacon that Clare snuck him from the kitchen. When the sergeant finished with Marcus, he extended his hand for a shake that communicated respect between professionals. The sergeant said the town was lucky Marcus had been here tonight. Those 3 had warrants in 2 states, and their record suggested Clare would have been in serious danger once the diner closed. Marcus accepted the information without visible reaction, but something cold settled in his stomach. He had read the situation correctly. His instincts had not failed him. He returned to the booth where Emma and Clare were waiting. His daughter looked up at him with an expression that combined pride and something more complicated. He sat down across from them and told Clare that the police said she was safe now. Clare nodded, tears threatening again. She said she did not know how to thank him. He had saved her life, probably. Those men, the way they were talking before he stepped in, the things they were planning. She could not finish the sentence. Marcus said she did not need to thank him. He said she should probably talk to someone about what happened tonight, someone professional who could help her process the trauma. Emma reached across the table and took Clare's hand. She told the waitress that her daddy was good at keeping people safe. It was his job for a long time, and Titan helped. Clare looked at the German shepherd, who raised his head at the mention of his name. She asked what kind of dog he was. Exactly. Emma said proudly that Titan was a military working dog, just like her daddy was a military working man. He had his own medals. The sergeant, who had been finishing up his paperwork nearby, overheard this exchange. He approached the booth and confirmed what Emma had shared. Her father was not just any veteran. He was a decorated member of the United States Navy's Special Warfare Development Group, 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart that he never talked about. Marcus shot the sergeant a look that suggested the information could have stayed private. The sergeant shrugged. He said the lady deserved to know who had saved her. Claire stared at Marcus with new eyes. She said she had heard stories about Navy SEALs but had never met one before. She had not realized they looked so normal. Marcus said that was rather the point. The diner slowly emptied as the last of the official business concluded. Dale offered to comp Marcus's meal. He accepted politely, more for Emma's sake than his own. She had never gotten her chocolate chip pancakes. Dale disappeared into the kitchen and returned with the largest plate of pancakes Marcus had ever seen, drowning in whipped cream and chocolate chips. Emma's eyes went wide, and for a moment the events of the evening seemed to fade. She attacked the pancakes with enthusiasm, sharing bites with Titan when she thought no one was looking. Claire sat with them while they ate. She asked Marcus about his life. She learned that he had been out of the Navy for 2 years, that he made his living now as a carpenter, that Emma's mother had passed from cancer when Emma was 5. She shared her own story in return, a degree in social work she had never used, a series of bad relationships that had left her wary, a dream of opening her own business someday. When she asked why he had intervened, why he had risked himself for a stranger, he took a moment before answering. He said that for a long time, his job had been protecting people who could not protect themselves. The uniform was gone now, but the responsibility remained. He saw someone in trouble, and he had the ability to help. The rest was simple math. Claire said it did not seem simple. It seemed incredibly brave. Marcus shook his head. He said bravery was acting despite fear. He had not been afraid of those men. He had been afraid of what would happen if he did nothing. There was a difference. Emma finished her pancakes and promptly fell asleep against Marcus's shoulder, exhausted by the evening's events. Titan positioned himself at the foot of the booth, head on paws. The old dog would not truly relax until they were home. Claire walked them to the door when it was time to leave. The parking lot was empty now, the police cruisers gone. The night air carried the smell of rain coming, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. She thanked him again, knowing the words were inadequate. She asked if he would come back sometime, if only so she could repay his kindness with free pie for the rest of his life. Marcus smiled, a rare expression that softened the hard lines of his face. He said they would be back next Thursday. It was their tradition. Claire watched them cross the parking lot to a weathered pickup truck. She watched Marcus settle Emma into the back seat with practiced gentleness, then load Titan into the passenger seat. She watched the taillights disappear down the interstate, red eyes fading into the darkness. In the truck, Emma stirred briefly as they merged onto the highway. She asked her father if they were going home. He said yes. She asked if the waitress would be okay. He said yes, she would be okay now. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked if he was okay. The question caught Marcus off guard. He considered lying, offering simple reassurance. But he had promised himself when her mother died that he would never lie to her about important things. He said he was okay enough. He said some nights were harder than others, but that was just part of living. The important thing was that nobody got seriously hurt, and the bad guys were going to face justice, and the waitress was safe. Those were good outcomes. Emma accepted this with the trust that children reserve for their parents. She fell back asleep before they reached the county line. Titan kept watch through the passenger window. The old dog had seen his share of hard nights. He knew the texture of violence. He also knew the peace that came after. Marcus drove through the darkness, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Titan's broad back. He thought about the men he had neutralized. He thought about the gun that had gone off, the bullet that had punched into the floor where it might have punched into flesh. He could not save them all. The world was too big, and he was just one man with a dog and a daughter and a pickup truck. But he could save the ones in front of him. He could be present when presence mattered. Days later, the diner returned to its ordinary rhythms. Truckers came and went, their 18-wheelers rumbling in and out of the parking lot at all hours. Coffee percolated endlessly in the ancient machine behind the counter, filling the air with that familiar bitter warmth that had become the signature scent of Rosie's diner. The only evidence of that Thursday night was a small hole in the linoleum floor, which Dale had covered with a rubber mat before corporate could see it and ask questions. Claire worked her shifts with a new steadiness. The fear had not disappeared entirely, but it had been joined by something stronger, a knowledge that she was not alone in the world, that someone had seen her distress and had chosen to act when no one else would. She found herself standing a little taller, speaking a little louder, taking up space in a way she had not allowed herself to do before. When a customer got too familiar, she did not smile and deflect anymore. She set boundaries, and she found that most people respected them when they were clearly stated. The ones who did not were asked to leave, and now Patricia, the new manager, backed her up every time. Dale, the manager, was let go 2 weeks after the incident, when the corporate office reviewed the surveillance footage and saw exactly how he had responded to a crisis in his establishment. The footage showed him hiding in the back office while a customer was being terrorized, showed him picking up the phone and putting it down again 3 times before finally dialing, showed him emerging only after the danger had passed. His replacement was a woman named Patricia Chen, who had worked her way up from dishwasher to regional manager over 20 years. She made it clear on her first day that customer harassment would not be tolerated, that employees had the right to refuse service to anyone who made them uncomfortable, that she would personally escort troublemakers off the premises if necessary. The diner felt safer now, not because of locks or cameras, but because of culture. The 3 men from that night remained in custody, their bail set high enough to ensure they would stay there. Justice moved slowly but steadily toward something resembling accountability. And on the following Thursday, Marcus Cole walked into Rosie's diner with his daughter Emma and his German Shepherd Titan. They took their usual booth by the window. Emma ordered chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream. Marcus ordered black coffee. Titan settled under the table with a contented sigh. Claire approached with the coffee pot, and her smile when she saw them was genuine. She asked how they were doing. Marcus said they were doing just fine. Emma showed off a drawing she had made, a picture of a girl and a dog and a man. Claire admired the artwork and told Emma she was a talented artist. She refilled Marcus's coffee and told him his meal was on the house, now and forever, manager's orders. He accepted with a nod that communicated both gratitude and the understanding that some debts could never truly be repaid. The diner hummed with ordinary life. Forks clinked against plates. Conversations murmured. The coffee maker gurgled its perpetual song. Nothing remarkable happened. Nobody needed saving. Marcus watched his daughter devour her pancakes and felt something settle in his chest. Peace. Maybe. He had spent years in service to his country, doing difficult things in difficult places. Now he was just a father in a diner, watching his kid eat pancakes, sharing a booth with an old dog who had earned his rest. Titan lifted his head when Emma slipped him a piece of bacon. His tail thumped once against the floor. The old warrior recognized peace when he found it. Claire brought the check, which showed a balance of 0. Marcus left a tip that was larger than the meal would have cost. Claire tucked the bills into her apron and thanked him, and the gratitude in her eyes was about more than money. When they left, the diner continued its rhythms unchanged. Another family slid into the window booth. Another pot of coffee began to brew. Marcus loaded Emma into the truck, then Titan, then himself. Emma chattered about school and friends and the book she was reading. They were not heroes. Marcus had made that clear to anyone who asked. They were just a family making their way through the world, doing their best to leave each place a little better than they found it. The sun was setting as they reached their driveway. Emma declared it was the prettiest sunset she had ever seen. Marcus agreed, because all sunsets were the prettiest when you watched them with people you loved. Inside, Emma ran to check on her goldfish, Captain Bubbles. Titan claimed his spot on the living room rug. Marcus stood in the kitchen, making dinner, listening to his daughter's running commentary. Ordinary life, the kind of life that millions of people lived every day, the kind of life that Marcus had fought to protect, the kind of life that made everything else worthwhile. They ate together, talked about Emma's day and Marcus's work. They did the dishes together, Marcus washing and Emma drying. Then it was time for Emma's bath and bedtime and the quiet rituals that marked the transition from day to night. When she finally surrendered to exhaustion, Marcus kissed her forehead and whispered that he loved her. She mumbled something back, already more asleep than awake. Titan had already taken his position at the foot of her bed. The old warrior would guard the child through the night. Marcus returned to the living room and sat in the darkness, as was his custom. But tonight, the silence felt different. Lighter. Somehow. He thought about Clare and the diner and the 3 men who had made the mistake of threatening someone in his presence. He thought about the choices he had made and the outcomes those choices had produced. And then, he stopped thinking and simply sat, breathing the quiet air of his home. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was only this. A man in his living room, his daughter safe in her bed, his dog standing watch, the world outside kept at bay. The silence was not empty. It was full of everything that mattered. The steady breathing of his sleeping daughter, the occasional creak of the old house settling on its foundation, the distant hum of traffic on the highway, reminding him that the world continued turning even when he stood still. And somewhere, in a diner by the interstate, a waitress closed out her shift and walked to her car and looked up at the stars. She thought about the stranger who had saved her and wondered where he was now, what he was doing, if he knew how much his actions had meant. She had started saving money, putting away a little from each paycheck, working toward that dream of opening her own place someday. It seemed possible now, in a way it had not seemed before. She had learned something important that night, something about the nature of courage and the power of standing up. Someday, when the time came, she would pay that lesson forward. She did not know that he was sitting in darkness, thinking about her, hoping she had found her own version of peace. But perhaps that was fitting. Heroes and the people they save rarely crossed paths again. Their stories intersected for one brilliant moment and then diverged, each returning to their own orbit, forever changed by the brief collision. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. The night deepened, stars giving way to the first hints of approaching dawn. And in a small house outside a small town, a man who had seen too much violence finally closed his eyes and slept the dreamless sleep of the exhausted and the justified. Titan heard his breathing change and raised his head briefly, confirming that all was well. The old dog's ears twitched, tracking some small sound outside the window, then relaxed when he determined it was nothing of concern. He settled back onto his paws and joined his humans in rest, his great body rising and falling with each slow breath. The Guardians had earned their sleep. The world would still need protecting tomorrow, would still contain men like the ones from the diner, would still hold waitresses and daughters and strangers who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. But tonight was for peace. Tonight was for the quiet moments that made all the loud ones worthwhile. Tonight was for a father and his daughter and their loyal dog, safe in their home, surrounded by love that asked for nothing and gave everything. Outside, the first birds began to sing, greeting a dawn that promised nothing but offered everything. A new day was coming, filled with all its ordinary challenges and ordinary joys. And when it arrived, Marcus Cole would rise to meet it, just as he always had, just as he always would. But for now, he slept, and the peace he had earned wrapped around him like a blanket, warm and soft and exactly enough.